In this video today, the Jeffrey Epstein files have been released by the Department of Justice, but there's only one problem. Where are the rest of the files? Also, egg prices. You know what Democrats are doing? They're blaming President Trump, but they have no receipts. We're going to get to both of these stories and more in this video, but let me show you this clip of influencers coming out of the White House carrying the Epstein file binder. Now, they're titling this the Epstein Files Phase 1, which clearly implies that there's way more files to be released in the future. And this is just one piece to that entire pie, of course. And again, that's very frustrating for the American people because at this point, what are we waiting on? I mean, we've had many, many years. You know, when you got appointed as the AG, you'd promised you were going to release the Epstein files. So why are you giving us a little snippet of it? Okay. I think that's a legitimate criticism. That's number one. Number two, the other criticism that's clearly starting to take off is why would you have influencers receive the information first and not Congresswoman Anna Luna, who heads up the task force, who was looking to release the files to the American people? Here's what she said, actually. I nor the task force were given or reviewed the Epstein documents being released today. A New York Post story just revealed that the documents will simply be Epstein's phone book. This is not what we or the American people asked for, and a complete disappointment. Get us the information we asked for. And this is a legitimate criticism. Phase 1? What are you talking about, a phase 1? Just release it all. Now, here's what Alina Habba told Piers Morgan this morning about the Epstein files.
I believe it will be today. I was just with, I saw Pam and Cash in the White House just before coming on your show. And I can tell you that I haven't been privy to it yet, but I know it is coming out. They will be taking portions of it. We have to be patient. And I said this last night at a dinner with some media. And I said, I think America needs to remember one thing. We are going to be promises made, promises kept. But when you're dealing with victims, and by the way, this is a perfect example of a case that was vetted, that went through trial, that had testimony, and was prosecuted the right way. I don't preemptively attack. That's just not the way I operate. But in this case, in Epstein's case, it is incredibly disturbing. We have flight logs, we have information, names that will come out.
Is it going to be shocking?
I don't see how it's not shocking that there were so many individuals that were hidden and kept secret and not been held accountable.
Now, there are a couple of points that George makes here on X that really warrant our attention. First, Pam Bondi revealed that thousands of Epstein files are still held by the Southern District of New York and will be delivered to the Justice Department by tomorrow. If that is true, then why come out with phase 1? Why not just wait till tomorrow? Second point here, can we just give Candace Owens and Laura Loomer the Epstein files? I know they're not going to let anything slip past them. I second that. I mean, they're like a dog with a bone, okay? And the third point here is I was really hoping the Epstein files release would be open sourced. It's not rocket science to create a landing page, upload all the documents there, and let everyone see. Everything will eventually come out to the public, but no one should be privy to declassified info first. And that's where they went wrong with this entire rollout. It definitely screams some level of suspicion. Like, why are you guys releasing it in this way? And you cannot tell me, well, it's for the victims. Okay, we already know about the victims. They have had Netflix documentaries about the victims. Okay, they've been interviewed on major cable news when it comes to the victims. So don't use that excuse. Just release it all and call it a day. So at this point, are there any files at all? I mean, what has actually been released? That's still a little fuzzy, but Senator Blackburn, she went on to Newsmax and described what was in that binder and what's going to happen moving forward.
What we have are some names from Ghislaine Maxwell's Little Black Book. Some of these are people that had previously been made public. Others are new to us. And one of the things that we have learned is that there was international participation in this human trafficking, sex trafficking ring that Jeffrey Epstein built. We also were able to see some notes from law enforcement that have not been previously released. We also saw some of the information from the search the FBI did of his residence. And we had heard this was done and that the FBI had that information, but we did not know what the search yielded. So we now have that list, so we can go back to the court and the court files and then recoup some of that information where they took laptops and computers and phones and retrieve information that was housed on those devices.
All right, big takeaways here. Number one, they don't have all the files. Number two, the files they do have, they're not actually ready to be released. That's why they have phase one. Number three, they're wasting people's time. Just don't even talk about it if you're not going to release everything, okay? I find it to be a huge disappointment. I understand the transparency. I definitely appreciate, again, the commitment to say we're going to release the files. But I just don't think they're doing it in the right way. Now, she goes on to say this.
The point is this. Every bit of this helps us in putting together the puzzle of how this global, massive human trafficking, sex trafficking ring was built. It also will help us get information on for these 254 victims, and all of their names are redacted.
Now, there happens to be a memorandum that has been leaked between AG Bondi and the FBI Director Kash Patel. And here's what the letter says. Before you came into my office, I requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response to this request, I received approximately 200 pages of documents, which consisted primarily of flight logs, Epstein's list of contacts, and a list of victim names and phone numbers. I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request, and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Well, late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files when you and I spoke yesterday. You were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio, and video recordings and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients. Regardless of how such information was obtained, there will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The DOJ will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner. The DOJ will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with the law. As I've done my entire career as a prosecutor, I am directing you to conduct an immediate investigation to why my order to the FBI was not followed. You will deliver to me a comprehensive report of your findings and proposed personnel action within 14 days. Now, you already know what this sounds like, right? This is them covering their you-know-what. Why is it that they came out with this flimsy list, phase one? This is what she's doing. And this isn't going to go very well with Trump supporters because I'm going to tell you right now, transparency is huge. The truth is the number one priority, and they are not afraid to disagree with the president in regards to how this has been handled. This is a total botched release, in my opinion, okay? Now, let's go to our next story, because although you may be able to criticize him on this, I think criticizing the president in regards to egg prices is totally unfounded. But that's what the Democrats are doing. This is why the White House just announced what they're planning to do about egg prices. Let's hear the details.
The Department of Agriculture announcing a $1 billion plan to tackle the bird flu outbreak that's been impacting poultry farms across the nation. Egg prices skyrocketing across the country. The USDA projecting a 41% increase in egg costs this year alone. News Nation's Brooke Schaefer joining us with more on the federal government's plan to address it. What does it look like, and how is it different from what we've seen so far?
Marnie, the Trump administration here announcing that it's actually going to throw another $1 billion at the bird flu battle as the USDA looks to not only combat the virus and help out farmers, but also bring down the cost of eggs. This plan announced yesterday calls for $500 million to help farms bolster biosecurity measures and another $400 million to help those whose flocks have been devastated by the bird flu. Then there's also going to be $100 million that will go towards research, therapeutics, and even possible vaccines. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said this of a possible vaccine for chickens on Wednesday.
And the way I would think about it is it's almost like the flu vaccine, right? Most people get it, but it only works 1 out of every 2 or 3 times. Before we start sticking our chickens, we need to ensure and putting that into the food supply that we know exactly what we're doing.
Now, I know it, you know it, everybody knows it, that this was already happening before President Trump took office. However, Democrats will always blame it on him because that's what they do. When Democrats want to get lazy, blame Trump, right? And let me give you an example of that. Here is the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, doing just that.
Remember how on day one of the Trump administration, prices are going to go down? You know what the cost of eggs in New York City are, if you can even find them?
You can't find them.
It went up 40% since Donald Trump was elected. So instead of going down, they're going up even higher. So people are starting to wake up. They're saying, wait a minute, this is not what I thought I was voting for.
Yeah.
And it's happening even sooner than I thought. I mean, literally in the first few months here. I thought this would take a little longer, but my God.
Yeah, of course she's being disingenuous, all right? She's got bigger problems on her hands than egg prices. That's my opinion. But this is what they do, okay? It's to be expected when you're the president. It's all your fault, of course. And the same thing happened with Biden. I mean, runaway inflation. That's on him, right? Now, I do believe they'll figure this out. It's just going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight because this has been a recurring issue. And the worst case scenario has happened. An actual bird flu, has infected these chickens. And the Biden solution was to kill chickens, which clearly has not worked. Now, here is the governor of Illinois, again, blaming Trump.
You know, you got to remember that the things that I'm speaking out about now, about, the threat to our democracy, this is not a message to win elections on. It's something people need to know. They need to know that that's happening. But, if you talk to 100 people, knock on 100 doors, and I've knocked on an awful lot of doors running for office, and you say to people, democracy is at risk, nobody knows what that looks like. They've never experienced it before.
Yeah.
And the reality is what people need to hear about is what the effects of that are. The prices at the grocery store are going up because democracy is being taken away. The impact on you in terms of your health care, 770,000 people in Illinois will lose health care as a result of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the Republican Congress are doing right now. It's a danger to your way of life. And that's what people need to understand. It's all about affordability. It's all about how you can, make it just a little bit easier for people every single day to live their lives, and they're taking that away from you. That is what it's like to have democracy taken away.
Okay, so constitutional crisis, Valentine's massacre, and the new one, which is disappearing democracy. I mean, I don't know who comes up with these terms for the Democrat Party. They got to knock it off, okay? I mean, that goes over people's head, and it definitely does not make them relatable. What we have to understand is grocery prices obviously went up almost 20% over the past few years under Joe Biden's term, okay? We're only 1 month into the Trump administration, and they're already getting ahead of themselves. They're acting as if he's been in office for the past 2 years. So again, you got the Democratic Party playing the blame game when it comes to Trump. And this takes us to our next story because they're also doing the same thing when it comes to Medicaid. This whole idea that Medicaid is going to get cut is still a talking point. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, had to come out, hold a press conference, and respond to it. Here's what he said.
Let me clarify what we're talking about with Medicaid. Medicaid is hugely problematic because it has a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse. Everybody knows that. We all know it intuitively. No one in here would disagree. We had a hearing in budget just last week or week before last. And they asked the experts, and the estimate is, I think it's $50 billion a year in fraud alone in Medicaid. Those are precious taxpayer dollars. Everybody is committed to preserving Medicare benefits for those who desperately need it and deserve it and qualify for it. What we're talking about is rooting out the fraud, waste, and abuse. Every taxpayer, it doesn't matter what party you're in, you should be for that because it saves your money and it preserves the programs so that it is available for the people who desperately need it. That's what we're about. And that's what you're going to see happen. We want to make sure that illegal aliens who do not qualify are not on the rolls, and we know that they are in many places. We can achieve a lot of savings with that. We can eliminate all these fraudulent payments and achieve a lot of savings. What you're doing with that is you're shoring up the program, and you're making sure that the people who rely upon that have it, and that it's a better program. That's what we're talking about. You've heard the president say that. You've heard members of the House Republican Conference say that. And no one else has said anything else, except the Democrats who have ads out that are lying about the intention here. That's the fact. The leader just held up the resolution. Do a word search for yourself. It doesn't even mention Medicaid in the bill. So,
all right, well, number one, Republicans have a tough job, right? They got to try to explain how they're going to cut the federal budget because this is what Trump ran on. They got to support the president. They got to pass legislation that is going to obviously take those executive orders and make it law, right? So that's a tough job messaging wise because Democrats are going to go to the extreme with everything that the Republicans say. Secondly, anybody who's serious about getting out of debt, especially when you're in $36 trillion worth, would take a hard look at every single government program out there and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and weed out the fraud, waste, and abuse. And number three, of course, Democrats have yet to actually provide an alternative plan to doing that. All they're doing is continuing to accuse Republicans of the worst case scenario. Hear it for yourself.
Republicans are lying to the American people about Medicaid. The Republican budget authorizes up to $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid by directing the Energy and Commerce Committee to find those spending cuts. Everybody knows who has had any connection to the congressional budget that if you are directing the Energy and Commerce Committee to find up to $880 billion, if not more, in spending cuts, that means Medicaid. That will hurt children, hurt families, hurt everyday Americans with disabilities, and hurt seniors. I can't say it any other way. Republicans are lying. Prove me wrong. There's nothing more that I would like better, that we as House Democrats would like better, than for Republicans to prove us wrong, that they are not planning to cut Medicaid.
All right. Well, the biggest thing that stands out to me when you're hearing both sides of the argument is the hypocrisy from Democrats. So what I mean by that is they can't have it both ways. You can't attack Republicans for at least entertaining the idea that they're going to have to take a hard look at Medicaid and at the same time cry that they're not doing anything to bring down the budget. So, I mean, which one is it? We know we're not going to take a huge chunk out of the budget if we're not looking at every single government program out there, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the Pentagon, entitlement programs. I mean, if we're not looking at those things, I don't think we're going to make any type of progress when it comes to the federal deficit. You know what's interesting? They were talking about that on Morning Joe, MSDNC. Hear it for yourself.
And the truth is, even if you did all the stuff that Elon's talking about, we pay $3 billion a day just on the interest on our debt. And so these little bitty tucks around the corner aren't going to do a darn thing. The truth is, if you want to change the deficit, you want to get rid of the debt, you either need to raise taxes a lot, or you need to cut defense, you need to cut Social Security, you need to cut Medicare, you need to cut Medicaid, or some combination thereof, because that's where we spend the vast majority of our money. And so a lot of this is a sideshow unless you're really going to get serious about trying to reduce the size of government, which is really hard work, which is why Republicans are having a difficult time coming together to figure out how can they both decrease taxes by up to $5 trillion, but retain all of those programs.
So I disagree with what he was stating about Elon Musk and Doge. I think you got to take care of the low-hanging fruit. Okay, you got to build the momentum. It's a snowball effect when you're paying down debt. Everybody knows that if you're really familiar with financial literacy. Now, in regards to what the White House is actually saying, here's what the economic advisor had to say.
Are you afraid to actually talk about Medicaid reform?
We're not afraid to talk about anything. And the thing that was sort of another thing that happened, Joe, yesterday was that we had our first big meeting of the White House, and the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader and the Chairman of the Finance Committee and Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And we started to put together a roadmap for what the next stage of reconciliation and then ultimately the big tax bill is going to look like. And so there was a lot of interesting conversation between the two. It was very collegial. I think some members of the House wanted to talk about those matters. I think that waste, fraud, abuse will be on the table for everything. And I think that there's probably that in every single program.
So overall, that's the message they're going to run with is fraud, waste, and abuse is what they're focusing on first. And then secondly would be the work requirements. For example, if you're 21 playing video games, you probably shouldn't be on Medicaid, right? I mean, you should probably have a job. Now, speaking of jobs, particularly federal employees, we know the whole Elon Musk sending the email to the federal workers became such a controversial move, I suppose, to people who are triggered emotionally. Well, one of those federal employees thought it was smart to go to social media and describe her response to this email. And of course, I have to respond to it. Let's check it out first.
Today, I responded to the email that we received as federal employees asking us to report 5 things that we accomplished last week. I'm not worried about my 5 things. I have plenty of things to report. I did plenty of work last week. But the feeling of just like absolute existential dread that I felt typing out a response to that email is something that I wish I could convey to everyone, because it felt like such a glimpse into the reality that they are trying to create. And it was terrifying. It felt like, you will do what I say or else. The email that we received did not say that failure to respond would be taken as a resignation, but the post on X did say that. And leadership at my agency is pretty much like, the email's authentic, but we don't know if the threat is or is not. We are going to respond, but kind of left it up to each of us to decide what to do. And the feeling that I felt responding to that email was such a glimpse into a possible future here, a probable future here if we don't fucking do something about it. It felt so scary and so heartbreaking. It felt much like I would imagine living in a place like what I always imagined North Korea to be like, where the energy is, yes, master, your wish is my command.
Yeah, so if you read the email and your takeaway was, this feels like North Korea, but we know you've never been to North Korea, that means clearly you're making stuff up in your head. That's the first thing. Secondly, why do you have such a negative mindset? Where's the gratitude? Aren't you happy that you have an opportunity to prove to your superiors that, hey, I got stuff done last week. I actually am of value. I do what I'm supposed to do, right? I mean, again, this is a mindset issue. It all comes down to how you react to something, not the thing itself. And so what you're seeing is a lot of people who are emotionally caught up. Understandably, they don't know if they're going to work, they're going to get fired. I get that. But to go on social media and do a whole sob story, I think that proves the point that maybe you probably shouldn't be working in the federal government. So that's why, according to Frank Luntz, the American people are happy about what Trump is doing. They have some criticisms about some of the messaging, but overall, we're headed in the right direction. Here's what he said.
What are you hearing from them now?
That they are really happy that people who should not be here are being asked to leave. That they're really happy that Washington's being held responsible and accountable for wasteful Washington spending. That they want to see the government be more efficient, more effective, and more accountable. The only criticism that they have is they don't want the president to take his eye off the ball when it comes to how much their day-to-day life costs them. These are people who, when you say paycheck to paycheck, it means that their house is barely paid for. It means that they have nothing left over at the end of the week or end of the month. And they want to make sure that this administration is as focused now as they were during the election campaign. They believe in everything else, but they're wondering, what will tariffs do to prices? What will a focus on changing the way that Washington works, how will that impact them favorably in their wallets and in their pocketbooks?
Yeah, so it's only been a month into Trump's presidency. It feels like it's been a year. That's why you're seeing a lot of Democrats prematurely judge the president when they really shouldn't, okay? I don't think it's time for judgment. Let's give them at least 6 months and see where we are at. But so far right now, overall, the American people are happy in the direction that we're going. Now, this takes me to the question of this video. What is your direct reaction to the Epstein file release? Do you believe or do you agree with me that Attorney General Pam Bondi botched this release? Instead of giving it to influencers, she should have set up a website and made it open source and have everybody have access to whatever documents she has in her possession. Let me know what's your reaction to all of this in the comment section below. Now, when you're talking about botching something, the next video that I'd love for you guys to check out for yourself is Gavin Newsom. He launched his own podcast. And no, it is not about high taxes in California or the wildfires or the water crisis or the homeless crisis or the failed high-speed rail. It's about him talking to MAGA influencers. If you missed out on that story, all you have to do is click on that video because it's coming up right now.